The hard light of the hospital corridor painted everything in a sickly palette, pale green walls, shined tile underfoot that looked perpetually dirty, and brittle plastic chairs. Footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the swinging doors, the place always with someone dying or being born deep in its machinery. I clenched the spiral-bound notebook under my arm, half expecting the word idiot to be scrawled across it in red ink. My mother and father flanked me like prison guards, arms crossed over their chests. Dad's jaw worked like he had a toothache. Mum perfected indignation, her face straight, eyes hard, nostrils flaring the way they did whenever someone cut her off in traffic. Every time, Dad hissed, every time we come for Nonna and you. I didn't make her sick, I snapped, my voice low because here respect for the dying had to be maintained. I couldn't help the edge or the way my neck burned. I just want 15 minutes with her, that's all. For what? Mum cut in, her bright magenta scarf bunched in white-knuckled fists. To tell her about your little movie dreams again. She doesn't have the energy for your stories, Luca. She can barely keep her eyes open. She's always asked, I said softer now. Nonna and I, we had our own rhythm, me talking, her nodding, each word a pebble I laid on the scale, proof I was more than the sum of my family's disappointment. Dad rolled his eyes. What will you tell her? That you're still unemployed, but at least you've got ideas? Because I really want my dying mother to know my son can't get his act together. A nurse drifted past and paused, clipboard in hand, looking between us. I saw her recognize the script, an argument in a corridor, act I. She moved on. I didn't flinch, just pressed my lips together. I have work. I'm filming a documentary, Dad. It's not glamorous, but... You're not anyone on TV, you're not bringing in money, he scowled. The mortgage doesn't pay itself with good intentions, mate. For a moment I thought I would scream. I wanted to punch the wall or sit down in one of the greasy chairs and dissolve. Balancing rage with the restraint I'd learned from years of being wrong, I stared at the blue linoleum. You keep saying that, but I'm not you. I don't want to be you. His reply rose up, brutal and unfiltered. Then you won't ever be anything. The truth of it, or maybe just the sound of it, smacked the moment into silence. Somewhere down the hall, an intercom spat static. I noticed how the fluorescent light above flickered and wondered if it would ever just die out. The three of us stood stiff in our geometry of pain, blocking the corridor like debris. My hands shook as I turned from them and walked towards Nonna's room. Nonna's breaths always sounded like she was out of air, yet she smiled when she saw me. Face dough soft from rest, but eyes darting sharp behind roomy lids. Ciao, Luca, she whispered, making a little space at her bedside. Hey, Nonna, my voice broke around my lips. I sat, reaching for her thin hand. The skin was paper and just as delicate, family arguing. I snorted, it's their favorite pastime. You let them be, you make your pictures. She always called them pictures, like I was painting something instead of wrangling cameras on cracked Sydney footpaths. I launched into stories for her, the doco on cabbies, the interviews with the night shift nurse, the time I almost got mugged outside King's Cross hauling gear that was worth more than everything I owned. She made little noises, squeezed my hand. I felt tears prick somewhere behind my eyes but didn't let them fall. I kissed her wrinkled hand and promised she'd be proud. She pressed something into my palm, a tiny silver pendant, her lucky charm since childhood, and said, for good work, for the real pictures. That night she died, that night I realized there was nothing left tying me here. Not to my parents' tidy house in 5 Dock, not to the school friends who silently swerved away from my risky ambition, not to the city that made dreams a daily punchline. At dawn, as the sky went grey, I packed the pendant and the notebook and left. Sydney is not kind to the hungry. It's all kinetic possibility at first, the clang of trams, neon at Darlinghurst, creaky ferries with cockatoos swooping overhead. By the second winter, Melbourne glamour seemed as unreal as old postcards, and each bill unpaid was one step closer to a bitter phone call home. Desperation has a taste. It's in the Nescafe sludge you drink because it's free, the stale pastry you beg off the closing bakery. It's in the endless, humiliating parade of emails, dear sir, madam, I would like to. Then it's in your very skin, like the city itself is trying to spit you out. I kept going, my documentaries never trended, never landed funding from the ABC, but I learned how to hear a story in ordinary pain. I filmed construction workers on a rain-lashed Pitt Street site, coaxing out jokes and fear in fractured English. I spent nights with a trans woman who let me listen in as she did makeup before walking Oxford Street. I stopped eating full meals, but I made films, rough, essential, as raw as Sydney boiled down to skin and bone. For rent, I patched together jobs, wedding videographer, bit player on corporate reels, once a day shooting footage for a B-grade horror film in Blacktown that paid me in cash and beer. My housemates rotated. A blues musician with insomnia, a lost English teacher, 2 poodles. I had only one constant, my battered camera, each scraped like a bruise I could narrate. My old world shrunk to Christmas texts from family, obligatory, shallow, rarely a question. I stopped coming home. If they noticed, nobody said. One Tuesday afternoon, 3 years from the hospital corridor, everything broke open. I was editing Final Cut on a doco set in Bankstown about Vietnamese grandmothers who found collective solace in an abandoned church after their men had died in the last wave of layoffs. The stories were luminous, quieter than the city's hard business, laden with memory and humor. I'd been sleeping in a tent-sized flat in Redfern, rent overdue. A cold email arrived from a woman at SBS, "Loved your screener. Is it available for broadcast?" My first joke was that it was a scam or an elaborate mistake by an old schoolmate, but her signature checked out, and when I called, she sounded brisk and real, wanting details. Within weeks, a contract, money in my account, short segments aired as fillers, then a late-night feature. I made more on the blind busker at Central, the skate kids risking every bone for a good shot, an inner west chef who fed the homeless every Thursday. Each new film brought its own web of learning, obscure copyright law, combative union reps, furious interviewees. I was restless, busy, resourceful. Rage fell away at the edges, replaced by a kind of fluttery gratitude I didn't entirely trust. It took time, long time. I still made things mostly unseen, still measured success in single digits, still hustled freelance gigs to eat. But now, when my films aired, strangers messaged. Some critics liked me. The city threw new doors open. By the next year, I was offered a series, my own. Every scrap of footage, all the sleepless years crowded together, proof that something in me had stayed standing, yet the hunger changed. I didn't want to leave a blazing trail in industry mags, not really. I wanted them, my family, the ones who swore I was nothing but a chronic disappointment, to see it. To admit that I'd made myself from smoke and hard will, and that the result could no longer be ignored. When the invitation for the Sydney Film Festival came, the official screening, full credits, red carpet, the works, I let the email sit unread for half a day. My hand shook as I dialed Dad. The phone rang 4 times. "Yeah, hi. It's me," I said, pulse roaring. "Luca." A long pause, like the line was made of ice. "I know. I've got a film screening," I said. "SFF, they called me. It's surreal, I get tickets for family." Another dead silence. "For family. Yeah, I'd like you there. Ask Mum too if you want." He didn't say anything for a while. I pictured him shifting the phone from cheek to cheek, opening and closing his free hand the way he did when angry or nervous. "All right," he said finally, "just tell me the details." When I hung up, I tasted something sharp in my mouth. It might have been hope. The opera house on nights like this sizzled with anticipation. Red carpet unfurled over the wide steps, TV crews jostled, flash bulbs spasmed. My name was printed beneath the festival's logo on ornate banners and screen schedules. Luca de Rossi, director. A PR minder marshaled me through, collecting me near the green room, blitzing me with names of attendees I would never remember. Everything moved dreamlike. I wore a bargain suit pressed at the last minute, collar itching. I carried Nonna's pendant, secret and private, inside a shirt pocket. I spotted my family across the lobby, Dad in a charcoal jacket he'd worn once a decade, stiff and uncertain in the riot of camera flashes. Mum next to him, her lipstick too red, her scarf wound defensively round her throat like armor. My younger cousin Nino must have come too, hiding behind his phone. They looked ordinary, out of place, almost frightened. Mum stepped forward first. I braced for her to say something dismissive or reduce everything to a gentle joke. Instead, she just reached and brushed invisible dust from my sleeve. "You look nice," she said quietly. "You clean up at least." Dad studied me for a moment, frowning, then shoved his hands into his pockets. "So, this is it then, the result of, well, all that stubbornness." I nodded as the PR minder hovered, urging me to move on. "Come inside," I said, voice lower now. "Tickets are all set, front row." We walked in together. Strangers greeted me, clapped me on the back. Dad blinked as our tickets were checked, and as nearly every chair in the main auditorium filled with people, famous actors on one side, locals in thick scarves on another, all eyes forward. The festival host read my name and the screen blazed with the words, belonging Stories from the Edge, a film by Luca de Rossi *. The lights dropped, there was a hush, a real waiting, the first frame flickered, on screen. Maria, one of my Vietnamese grandmothers, lighting a candle in the derelict church, her hands trembling, the yellow flame a living thing. Then the group singing hymns, their voices soft but strong, the stories rolling out in translation, in smiles, in tears. As the film played, there was laughter, there was silence, the heavy kind, as one woman described leaving Saigon dressed as a boy to avoid the army. The room caught its breath, people leaned forward, I stole a glance at my family. Dad's hands gripped his knees, Mum stared at the giant screen, face blurry but intent. Nino forgot his phone. I tried to hear my own heart. As credits rolled, my name in that bold, clean font, *director/producer/cinematographer*, the audience erupted. For an instant I didn't feel present. Applause shook the aisles. Strangers glanced at me. I sensed pride, curiosity, maybe even awe. The host called my name, beckoning me for a bow. I stood, suddenly unsure, and let the sound wash over me. Dad and Mum didn't move at first, lost for an appropriate response, as though everything they'd prepared to say for years was now useless. Then Nino, grinning huge, started clapping louder, so much louder. I searched my father's face for skepticism, for shadow, for the old sneer of disbelief. What I saw instead was something raw and unfamiliar. His eyes glassed, hurt shining through the armor. He looked at me not as a failure but as someone brand new, someone maybe he wished he'd understood sooner. We walked out as one, fresh night air bracing along the harbor. My parents stuck close, even while trying to pretend pride was a language they always spoke. On the ferry home, Dad stood next to me, hands resting on the rail, staring out at the city lights. They reflected on the water that danced under the hull, as wild and shifting as I'd felt for years. "You did good," he said finally, gruff and unfinished. "Really?" Mum nodded, her arm looped around mine. "Your nonna would have loved it. She'd tell everyone at mass over and over." My throat closed up so full I could hardly swallow. For the first time since that hospital corridor, I felt a current running between us all, a deep thread, more complicated than approval or apology. A kind of return, not triumphant but true. On my phone, messages from strangers and friends alike streamed in, congratulations and bursts of exclamation, a tide that sent me far from that sticky, bitter corridor of long ago. I watched the old city slip by, lights flickering across the waves, and felt myself finally at home. As if all the pain and hope of dreaming foolish dreams could be claimed now, not as proof I'd been wrong, but that I'd found my way back by making something only I could make. The ferry hummed along, the water beneath us dark and alive. My father's silence wasn't quiet anymore. It was full of slow understanding, a promise that we had more left to say, now that he could finally believe it was worth the listening.